are a collection that have an ordering, meaning that there's a first item, a second item, and so on until the last item. The first two types of Python sequences that we'll learn about are strings and lists. Strings are sequences of characters, like a greeting or a name, and lists are sequences of any sort of item, like this list of temperatures. To create a string literal, we can use two syntaxes, either single quotes or double quotes. But what we need to do is be consistent, so we can't start a string out with single quotes and end it with double quotes. We can also create multi-line strings with 3 quotation marks, either 3 single quotation marks or 3 double quotation marks, as long as we're consistent. Lists are sequences of any kind of item. We create a list using square brackets, and then by separating out all of the items by commas, and ending with a closing square bracket. So this is a list that has 4 items in it, and this is a list that has 1 item in it. The len function is a built-in Python function that returns the length of a given sequence. So if I call the len of this string, then I get 3. If I call the len of this list, then I get 2. Sometimes we want to pick out a specific item in a sequence. So suppose that we have s, which is set to the string Python. To Python, this is a sequences of characters, and every character has an index starting with 0. It's important to remember that in Python, like most programming languages, the first item has index 0. What this means is that if we want to get the first item, then we would say the name of the sequence, and then open square bracket, and then the index that we want. So if we're getting the first item, that's index 0, and then close square bracket. So I'll refer to this expression as s sub 0, and if we evaluate the expression s sub 0, then we get p, the first item in s. If we take s sub 4, then we get o, the fifth item in s. If we take the expression s sub len of s minus 1, then Python computes len of s, and it gets 6, and then subtracts 1 from 6 to get 5, and the value of this overall expression is n, or in general, it's the last item in the sequence s. Now, we often want to get the last item in a sequence, so Python also includes negative indices, starting from -1 as the last item and counting backwards to the beginning. This allows us to drop the len and get the last item by writing the expression s sub -1, and if we get s sub -1, then the value of this expression is n. If we ask for s sub -4, then the value of this expression is t. But if we ask for s sub -0, then because -0 is the same as +0, then we get p. Remember that lists can be sequences of any type, including other sequences. So here we have this list L, and it has 3 items. All 3 happen to be other sequences, or strings. But L itself only has 3 items, even though all of these items happen to be strings. So if we get that first item, or L sub 0, then we get Python. And we can even add another indexing expression. So if we get the second character of the first item in L, then we get Y. Going back to indexing L, if we ask for the second item, then we get C++. And if we ask for the last item, then we get JavaScript. Sequences allow us to add or multiply them. So we can add the string hello to the string world to get the longer string hello world. Or we can add the list that has one item 1 with the list that has one item 2 to get a list with 2 items 1 and 2. We can even multiply sequences to repeat them. So here, if I take hi times 5, then I get hi 5 times. And if I take the list 1 and multiply it by 5, then I get a list with 5 ones in it. Sometimes sequences can look strange, but it's important to understand how the Python interpreter will see them. To Python, this is just an empty string. It's still a string, it just so happens to have 0 items in it. This is an empty list. Again, still a list, it just happens to have 0 items in it. And to Python, this string 106 is very different from the integer 106 because this is a string, whereas this is an integer. We can have one item lists. So this is a list with one item, which is the integer 106. And again, it's very different from just the integer 106. Because to Python, this is a list that has one item in it, and that item just happens to be the integer 106, whereas this is an integer. Some things that look tricky, but make sense when you look at them more carefully, is that this expression creates a list with one item. That one item is an empty string. And this is a string that has 2 characters, open and close square brackets. There are other methods on strings and lists. So there's .find, which returns the index of an item, or -1 if it's not there. And there's .index, which does the same thing, except throws a runtime error if it doesn't find an item. And there are a few methods on lists that mutate the list that we'll talk about more later on. So there's .append to mutate a list to add an item to the end, and there's .insert, which mutates the list to add an item anywhere. There are many more functions that we will go over later, and even more that we won't get to in this course. So sequences are ordered collections, and we went over 2 sequence types in Python. Strings are sequences of characters, and lists are sequences of any kind of item.